Welcome back. We are joined today by Seyed Mohammed Marandi, a professor at Tehran University and a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. So thank you very much for coming on now. I know the situation there must be very tense as the US appears to be possibly moments away from actually attacking Iran. And I was hoping that you could clarify or explain how you see this situation because, well, to me, it seems that Trump wants to deliver a so-called bloody nose attack on Iran. That means a limited attack. So essentially bomb Iran and by the end of the day, essentially offer to stop it on the condition that Iran doesn't retaliate. However, it also seems that it's very difficult for Iran not to retaliate. Otherwise, its deterrent means nothing, and the Americans will likely be back for some more bombing. And indeed, this is what your foreign minister indicated. He wrote on Twitter that Iran's armed forces are prepared with, quote, their fingers on the trigger, and they would respond to any aggression. And he put any in bold, which again, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but for me was essentially a caution against any such ambitions or about a so-called bloody nose attack. So, but this nonetheless means that Trump is more boxed in. He was beating his chest. He assembled this very powerful military force in the region. However, given that this would likely be a very big strategic mistake, if not a disaster in the making, that there could be some hope for reversal. Um, Again, I'm not sure if this would be the case, but I was wondering if you could share your thoughts around what you see happening now or what you expect. Do you see things in a similar light?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Glenn. It's always a great pleasure. It's pretty clear for the Iranians that what we're seeing today is an extension of the 12-day war. In the 12-day war, the Israeli regime and the Trump regime, they collaborated to undermine Iran and they failed. And the riots and the terror attacks that we saw in the last couple of weeks, a couple of weeks ago, on January the 8th and the 9th, they were an extension of that. And so we saw how the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, he admitted this in Davos. He gloated about it. He said this is statecraft that he was able to manipulate the Iranian currency and bring people to the streets. Now, when people came to the streets, it was peaceful, nothing happened. But then after, on the third day, we saw these very highly trained groups, terrorists and rioters in different cities and in different parts of big cities come to the streets and create great destruction. And on the 8th and the 9th of January, they were killing large numbers of people. Especially on the 8th, they killed large numbers of police officers. And that's why on the 9th, the armed policemen and the security forces, they came down very hard on them and ended this. So this project killing 350 police officers, they also killed many ordinary people because they wanted the casualty numbers to increase to make the case for war. And then after that, we saw, and of course, the Israelis took responsibility. They proudly took responsibility. Western media pretends that they didn't. They call these peaceful protesters, even though the footage clearly shows them shooting and killing police officers, beating them to death, and so on. But the Israelis, I mean, Pompeo, the former head of the CIA, said the Israelis were there. Mossad issued a statement saying that they were involved. And Channel 14 of Israel, which is close to Netanyahu, said very clearly that the weapons that we took into Iran caused the deaths of hundreds of Iranian police officers. So imagine if something like that happened in your country, in the United States, what the state would do in response. So, and then this media campaign that we saw afterwards, from conservative to liberal, from the Guardian to Fox News, from uh, the worst of the neocons like Levin to the supposed progressives like AOC, they're all talking about, helping Iran, and of course we know what that means. So this was obviously a project, and it was an extension of that war, which failed. But what it succeeded in doing was to encourage Trump or push Trump, depending on how you view it, towards confrontation with Iran. And of course, the intentions keep changing because one day it's about the protesters, then Trump himself admits that both sides were shooting. Then it's about the nuclear program, which was apparently destroyed a few months ago by Trump, obliterated, I think was the word. And so it's constantly the intent. Then they talk, and then the United States sends messages to Iran saying you have to put aside your missile program, you have to put aside your support for regional organizations and allies, and you have to, of course, end your peaceful nuclear program. We have conflicting messages coming from the United States, but the Iranian response has been clear. Any attack on Iran will be seen as an all-out war, and the Iranian response will be overwhelming. And I think Trump has boxed himself in, as you said. I think that's a very good way of putting it. Trump has come in, beating his chest, and now he either has to back off or he has to attack. If he attacks, it is going to be, the retaliation is going to be massive. And it won't just be directed at American bases. It'll be directed at American interests across the region. And those Arab dictatorships, family dictatorships, or even Aliyev's dictatorship in Azerbaijan, all of them, they have been complicit. They've hosted U.S. bases, or they've assisted the Israelis in the 12-day war. All of them, therefore, will be punished. And oil and gas from the Persian Gulf region will be disrupted for a very, very long time. The Caucasus, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea. And that would, of course, bring down the global economy. So war with Iran would be horrible for everyone, but it will bring down the U.S. economy. Now, some in the United States say we're energy independent. That's not really relevant because those companies, those corporations that produce oil and gas in the United States may make a lot of money as a result of the price of oil going through the roof or the price of gas going through the roof. But consumers, factories, corporations, individuals, families, it will be catastrophic for all of them because they'll have to pay much more for energy. And that is not possible. So the U.S. economy will collapse. And this would be at a time when the U.S. economy is already in a very, very difficult situation, as we're seeing with gold and silver and what it seems to me mean and what people are saying about the future of the economy. This would just add much more fuel to the fire. So the smart thing for Trump to do would be to back off and to end this peacefully. Maybe like in the case of Yemen, he can capitulate but say he won, because that's what happened in the war with Yemen, as we recall. He initiated the war. He and his Secretary of War, as he likes to call himself, attacked and said, we're going to destroy the Houthis, as they call them, or Ansar Allah, to be more precise. And after a month, he declared victory and walked away, even though he was defeated and he gained nothing. So maybe Trump will just say, well, I got concessions from Iran and I won, which obviously would mean that he was defeated, but it would be the smart thing to do. Or he will feel that he has to do something. Even a small attack, Glenn, even a small symbolic attack is going to have a very harsh response. And the reason is clear. The Iranians are not going to allow the United States to create an environment where every 6 months they can stage an event in Iran, they can make some sort of accusation, they can cause some sort of armed insurrection in some place, in some territory, and then use that as an excuse to create another crisis. So the Iranians are saying, we end it here.
Well, it's it's no secret, I guess, that the Israelis have been pushing hard for the United States to strike Iran again. On the other hand, it also seemed that Israel would like to stand on the sideline to, in other words, not not be the target of any retaliation of Iran. But how do you, again, you're not serving the Iranian government, you're an academic, but how do you expect the Iranian government to retaliate from what you know? Would they strike against some U.S. target, all U.S. target, Israel, other allied countries? Because I saw that I think it was Saudi Arabia that announced it would not permit its airspace from being used. So it looks as if some countries are, well, seeing the severity in this and would like to sit this one out.
Well, increasingly, countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, they are worried about the Israeli regime. And I think that even the Turkish government deep down recognizes that what they did to Syria has now made them very vulnerable. But ultimately, Glenn, we have to we have to look at something first and discuss something first before I can answer that question. Iran and the Israeli regime had a 12-day war. Although the Americans and Israelis conspired, regional assets in the Persian Gulf and Turkey were used, the radar systems, the entire West was behind the Israeli regime. They supported them. They lost, despite the blitzkrieg attack. We all know that. After a few days, the tide turned and the Israelis were seeking a ceasefire. It's something that is well known, except for in propaganda circles. But even Steve Bannon has pointed this out. But Iran's capabilities against the Israeli regime are much greater than the Israeli regime's capabilities against Iran. That 12-day war showed it. Iran's military capabilities are not focused on Israel. They're focused on the United States. Why? Because ever since the United States, in particular, ever since the United States invaded Afghanistan and Iraq during the unipolar moment and surrounded Iran, and ever since U.S. leaders, including Bush and Obama, Clinton, Hillary, started saying all options are on the table, and U.S. officials saying real men go to Tehran, Iran began to prepare itself for war with the United States. So most of the underground missile and drone bases in Iran are armed with short-range and middle-range drones and missiles that are directed at the Persian Gulf, that are directed at the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Oman, and the other side of the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula. So that capacity, that capability, including the underwater capabilities that Iran has, those capabilities are much greater than Iran's capabilities that it can use against the Israeli regime. So if there's an attack, Iran can not only just shut down the Strait of Hormuz, it can destroy ships on both sides of the Strait of Hormuz. And it can destroy the energy assets. And then in addition to that, its allies in Iraq, they can shut down the oil trade, and they can deal with the United States in Iraq and in surrounding territories. The same is true with Yemen. Yemen today is much stronger than it was a few months ago. They've been preparing themselves. They'll shut down the Red Sea and any oil and gas exports to the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean. In Azerbaijan and Aliyev, who helped the Israelis during the 12-day war, their oil production and gas production can be shut down very easily. So Iran's real capabilities are focused on the Persian Gulf region, and they're massive. And the Persian Gulf region is extremely vulnerable. There's nothing that the Americans can do to protect their assets there. And all of the regimes in the Persian Gulf, these family dictatorships, they're complicit because they host U.S. bases. So a war would, without a doubt, lead to the collapse of a war between Iran and the United States would lead to a collapse of the global economy. Now, the Israeli regime, from what we've been hearing, does not want to be involved because it's extremely vulnerable. We saw during the 12-day war that they failed. And they've not only has Iran's missile capabilities been enhanced significantly, but its air defenses, especially with regards to drones, has been strengthened. And the Israelis have failed to be able to catch up. So the advantage today is much greater for Iran than it was back then. So what the Israeli regime and Zionists want is for the Americans to sacrifice themselves for the Israelis. And the people surrounding Trump, people in Congress and in the Senate, they're Israeli firsters. They will sacrifice U.S. interests for Israeli interests. So there is a good chance that despite the fact that this would be catastrophic for the United States, that they may actually carry this out because they're doing it for the sake of Israel. Actually, if we go back at the case of the murder of General Soleimani, this also happened. Initially, General Soleimani was supposed to be murdered in a joint operation between the Israelis and the Americans. And at the very last moment, Netanyahu pulled out. And I think that that was the intention all along. U.S. drones, of course, went from Qatar and murdered General Soleimani, something that the Iranians are not going to forget. So Qatar, the Emirates, and others, Aliyev and Azerbaijan, if the U.S. attacks, they had better be very, they should have their bags packed. But this, I think, is what the Israeli intention was all along with General Soleimani, to push Trump towards confrontation with Iran, but not to get involved. It's quite possible that this is what we're seeing today. I don't know if Trump is going to attack, because even though I don't consider him to be completely sane, but I don't think he's totally insane either. But I don't know what sort of information he's being fed. I think maybe he was hoping that if he brought in this, what he calls an armada, that Iran will be intimidated and that they will somehow capitulate. Not a chance in the world that that will happen. Then maybe he thought that he could get away with it because he did send messages to Iran that, okay, let me strike, and then you can have this token retaliation and it'll be all over. Iran said, no, we're not playing that game. Because as I said, that is a violation of Iranian sovereignty. It's an act of war. But more importantly, it leaves the door open for another round of terrorism in Iran and pretending that these are peaceful protesters, and the Western media, being obedient to power, will just repeat the nonsense that Trump and the White House wants them to repeat. And then we'll have a new round of airstrikes that we cannot have normality that way. So the Iranians are saying it all stops here. You either back off and go away, or you start something, you pay the price. And I think that either way, the United States loses. But if it initiates a conflict, it loses much bigger. And I think that things will get very bad. And remember that Iranians know the United States very well. The United States does not comprehend Iran. It just doesn't. General Soleimani once said, we are the nation of Imam Hussein. I don't think the United States even comprehends what that means. But the Iranians know the United States. The Iranians monitor the United States. They know that the economy in the United States is doing poorly. They know how poorly Trump is doing in the polls. They know the divisions in the United States. They know that there's a hardcore group called MAGA that will support Trump no matter what. If doesn't matter apparently about what Epstein has done and who's a friend, who was with Epstein, or who in the Epstein class was involved, they'll close their eyes. You can shoot white women in the face. You can murder nurses who were helping war veterans. You can, all of the things that MAGA used to talk about, the endless wars and all that of that has been dropped. MAGA will follow the cult leader wherever he goes. But if the price of gasoline goes through the roof and factories are shut down, the first who will chase Trump with their guns, the same people who were saying, by the way, that the nurse murdered, he shouldn't have been carrying a gun. These same people will be seeking out Trump, and they may be carrying their guns with him. So with themselves. So everyone will turn against Trump when the economy falls because they'll see him as being responsible for it. Iranians understand that, and that's why their priority will not be a few U.S. military bases. They will strike them. They will strike military targets. But when they say that U.S. interests across the region are targets, they're sending a message to Trump that your presidency will come to an end if you start a war.
I think a lot of America's regional allies recognize they're a bit exposed, but part of the problem, I think, is this shift in world order, or at least the distribution of power, because under the unipolar moment, that is, in the 1990s, because America was the only game in town, everyone more or less recognized that if you were allied to the United States, this will essentially be the only source of security. Yes, this is the one center of power. However, as the world um, power shifts towards a multipolar system, we see very different. That is, instead of an alliance with the US being a source of stability, we now see the US becoming more reckless. I'm not sure how many countries Trump has bombed now, but also then the US being less capable of defending allies, even sometimes turning, not sometimes, quite often recently, turning on allies. And this leaves allies very exposed. So it is for countries, be it Qatar or others who have linked their security this intimately close to the United States, they find themselves in a very awkward position now. So it's not much time for them to shift their position. However, I wanted, just in terms of trying to assess the possible Iranian response here, to what extent would Iran treat this as an existential threat, I guess, as an indicator for how it would fight? Because Professor John Mersheimer, he just recently said that the objective of the United States in Iran would be regime change, but he also made the point that there's no replacement regime, no one unifying opposition which they can actually hand over power to, which means that what they are after then is regime change and then the destruction of the country, that is breaking it up, essentially chaos, and then ruling over the chaos. Is this kind of ideas informing Iran's, I guess, intentions and the extent to which it would actually respond to an attack?
Yes, I think for Iranians, it's clear that the objective is to balkanize Iran and that the Israeli regime wants this more than anyone else. Just like what they've done to Syria over the past decade and a half, they've succeeded in wrecking the country and balkanizing the country. And now there's no sense for it. In fact, one of the interesting things about Syria, Glenn, is that Hezbollah today has an easier time rearming than it did under Assad. Because under Assad, he increasingly was he was increasingly becoming less cooperative. But now you can just pay a bit of money, and you can do anything in Syria. That's how bad the situation is. So that is the objective, and the United States is not going to do anything that's against Israeli interests. And the riots and these rioters in Iran, these were like ISIS. They were horrific. They were just gunning down people on the streets. They burned 15 people alive. They beheaded people. They smashed people's faces. They burned down hospital clinics. They burned down hundreds of ambulances and fire engines and public buses and private. I mean, it's extraordinary what they did in such a short period of time. But the groups that were behind it, the monarchists, they have no popular support. When they left the country, they stole billions of dollars, and now they're calling on the United States and Israelis to bomb their own country. Does anyone in their right mind think that they're going to have popular support? Or the MEK terror cult. They fought for Saddam Hussein as foot soldiers against their own country in the 1980s. Does anyone think that traitors are going to be popular? Or the Kurdish terror groups, the separatists, or the ISIS and the Takfiri Wahhabis in Baluchistan, the remnant or the remnants of ISIS. These were the groups that were involved. Does does anyone think that one of these groups can rule or govern or would have any popular support? The point is to bring down Iran, and which is not going to happen. But the Iranians recognize that. But in addition to that, what I alluded to earlier is the fact that the United States wants to have this sword above Iran. So if they can bomb Iran, even a symbolic strike, it would give them that opportunity to use this sword again 6 months from now. And so that would always prevent the Iranian economy from normalizing. And that would always keep pressure on ordinary Iranians. And we saw how the US Secretary of Treasury in Davos was gloating about hurting ordinary Iranians, making ordinary Iranians suffer. So the Iranians said, enough is enough. Trump strikes. We take this as an existential fight. And we will fight the war as a war for our existence and survival.
Well, I've been watching all day on the screens here the different kind of American military hardware moving into the region. So ranging from warships to this transport flights, refuelers, all of these things. And so again, Trump is building up a big momentum, which makes it very difficult to walk away without anything. So he's put some demands again that Iran can negotiate, but the Iranian government has said that it's always willing to sit down and talk, negotiate, but not while the U.S. military is there aiming their guns at Iran. But also from American media, it suggests that the deal the Americans want would entail halting nuclear enrichment, which would be a big economic hit for Iran, but also limit long-range ballistic missiles and also cut off its ties with regional allies, which could then leave Iran very exposed to a future attack. Is there anything at all, do you think, to negotiate here, or is this essentially seen as a stepping stone to regime change anyways? I mean, how does the Iranian government view the possibility of reaching an agreement with the United States?
Well, giving up nuclear enrichment or its missile capabilities or its alliances is just out of the question. With regards to a deal, we had a deal, the JCPOA. Actually, we weren't satisfied with it. And if we're going to have another deal at some point in the future, if it's not going to be like that, it will have to be something better for Iran. Now, how does Trump escape from this position that he's boxed himself in? I have no idea. Either he strikes and we have all out war, as I said, doesn't matter the nature of the strike, it will be an existential war for the Iranians, or he declares victory like he did with Yemen and backs away. There could be a deal to discuss a deal about the nuclear program, but not a deal where the Iranians give up sovereignty or the right to enrich uranium. There are creative ways of doing things, and Trump, of course, he can easily lie and convince MAGA that he won, even though he gained really nothing. That is a possibility, but the Iranians are not counting on it. The Iranians are ready for war, and they're ready for all-out war. And if there is war, I think that some of the countries in the Persian Gulf region will cease to exist, at least under current management. But it is possible for Trump to walk away because that's what he did in Yemen. He always declares victory, even when it's clear that he had to back down. In the case of, let's say, the trade war with China, with Greenland, in many instances, he said one thing and then he did something quite different. In the case of Yemen, as I mentioned, this could also be something like that. I'm sure the Iranians would be willing to let him um, es- get himself out of this box uh, in a way in which he can pretend that he got something, but the Iranians are not going to give him anything that will violate their sovereignty. That era, that Iran is not that sort of country. Iran is not, Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or it's a different kind of country. It's fiercely independent, and it's resisted the United States for almost 5 decades now. So it will continue to do so. This time around, though, Glenn, I think is going to be decisive. If the United States backs down for whatever reason and declares victory, they can do that. If it backs down, it's a major defeat after all these threats. But if it engages in war, it is a tragedy for the world, but the United States will be defeated. And by default, Iran will win the war. But it will change your life. It will change my life. It will change the lives of people in the southern tip of Latin America and the southern parts of Africa and in the eastern and western parts of Asia. It will change everyone's lives because if there's an energy crisis, uh, the world will change.
So if there's any calls from Washington to Tehran today with a proposal that listen, we'll walk away from this, but we have to drop a few bombs so we don't lose face. This is not going to be acceptable to the Iranians.
No, zero, nothing, not at all. Iran's counterstrike will be massive, and they've already said that. The only thing that can be done is for the United States to walk away and pretend that it got something, whereas it didn't get anything. But that's the only way left for Trump. The rest is war, and we don't want war. And we've been saying that. The foreign minister has said that. Others have said that. We're willing to negotiate. We've always been willing to negotiate. But to give up any part of our sovereignty or our support for the Palestinian cause or our defense capabilities is just simply out of the question. And so Trump has put himself in a very, very dangerous situation. If there is war in this region, Glenn, it will be far more consequential for the world than Ukraine.
Well, if anyone was to reverse position, I guess Trump would be the ideal president. He is an artist in BS, so he could shift focus. I mean, only last week we talked about invading Venezuela, invading Greenland, so he could always shift focus to, annexing Canada or whatever is next on the menu, or destroying Cuba. So, yeah, but it's sad if world peace now depends on the BS skills of President Trump. So, anyways, I know you guys must have a lot of things to do there at the moment, and thank you for taking the time, and stay safe.
It's always an honor, Glenn. Stay safe.